Good evening. It is me again. It's hard to believe that 24 hours has gone by. It's unbelievable. It's just one day after the other going by very quickly. And for those of you who are in the United States, I guess you're all getting ready for Thanksgiving. And so you should be. We should all be giving thanks every day, but I guess the fact that we have to have a day set aside to give thanks is probably just as well. I think it's just as well that we decide that we're going to set aside some time to reflect on things and to really, be with each other. And I guess the thing is, for people that enjoy their families, they probably get together anyway throughout the year. And if you enjoy your family, then it's a great time. I think it can be a little bit stressful, a little bit disconcerting for other people, possibly. I'm curious to know how people cope with things, especially if you've been somewhat awakened. I think a lot of people actually are awakened, and I think the fact that our political climate is the way that it is, and, we've got people that are actually calling out the media for what it is. It makes for a different conversation. I'm not saying it's better, easier. I think it's sometimes even more tricky because now you have the added bonus of having, the Donald Trump conversation. And for, depending on what side you are on in that particular discussion, it's going to make for some interesting times. So one of the things that I've really decided to do with this channel is to just present the information, and it's not really meant to be provocative or to be in any way, I'm not trying to create a controversy here. I'm trying to actually help people like myself who just want to find out the facts, want to find out the information. I started off in media production many, many years ago. And it was interesting when I was becoming a journalist. Somebody said, well, I hope that you really like to chase after, people with a microphone, put a microphone in people's faces when they're in the middle of tragedy. And I thought, no, that's not really what I want to do. So I sort of opted out of that whole thing. Because in those days, you were either on television. I had a TV show, not had a TV show, but I was part of a TV show when I was very, very young. So I had this really unique opportunity. And I guess I thought it was a lot easier than it is. And since then, I've done some TV, and I really enjoy radio. But, the fact that we can do a YouTube channel is pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And that we can do it on our own terms, and we don't necessarily have to go out and chase people with a microphone. It's great. So I'm going to be putting up on the screen here, I've got a little graphic at the bottom of the screen, and I just want to point that out to you because I just want to let you know, I know everybody has their own little campaigns. I certainly didn't lose everything in a fire, but, it was sort of more of a slow burn, as they say. But I did have quite a loss of my home after Tom died. But, even before that, it's been a sort of a slow loss. But I do have the Airstream Studio. I am working out of the Airstream Studio right now. And I'm living in a little tiny fifth wheel, which, I'm certainly not complaining about. I'm very happy to have that. But I got the opportunity to purchase a bigger fifth wheel, which is basically like a tiny home, where I could actually have, a bathroom and a bedroom and that sort of thing. And so, needless to say, after the experiences of the past year and a half, that even those things, as we come up to Thanksgiving, I can be grateful for those things very much so. And I am very thankful for everything that I have and that I've been given, and particularly for this studio, which has been the one factor that has not changed over the time. But what I have done is I've gotten involved with Streamlabs because Super Chat, well, basically that everything that I do gets demonetized anyway. So, that I don't want to rely on anything on YouTube. But Streamlabs is nice because they actually allow you to sort of tie in with directly with your PayPal account or direct donations. So anyway, what you see at the bottom there is I'm getting very close to the goal. I got another $1,500 to go. And so I'm just putting that down at the bottom of the page it's actually not a page for you, it's a screen for you. And just letting people know how that's going. And if you feel so moved, then there is a link. And it's very simple. If you know about Streamlabs, it's very simple matter. Even if you can put a couple of dollars toward that would be really appreciated. And the sooner I can do that, the sooner I can actually live in a space that is conducive to living as compared to just existing. Meanwhile, I spend a lot of time here in the studio trying to prepare interesting things that we can talk about. Now, we get a lot of different discussion feedback on the videos, and for those that are just joining us, I'm not here to in any way try to convince people of a point of view. What I'm here to do is much like what Dr. Judy and I were doing when we're doing the PSYOP recovery program, just to get people thinking, just to get people considering various ideas. So to that end, I've actually put together a website besides characterdriven.com, which is my site for the workshops I do. I teach filmmaking to kids and media, basically. It started off as theater, then I got into filmmaking, and now it's basically all forms of media. And I don't want to mix up the two. So Character Driven will give you all sorts of information about what my background is and what I do with my radio show and with some of the other media activities, and as they say, the workshops. And then I've got Red Pill Square, which the reason for Red Pill Square is to post some of the information that I get. And today I got someone sent me some really interesting information that actually came out of the it came out of the, what was it, Los Angeles Times? Let me just take a look here. So I've got the actual articles here. Now, again, these are not in any way my articles. I'm just reproducing them so that we have a repository for the show and so that you can go and do some of your own research. So what I'm trying to do here is to go over some of these images in the same way that Dr. Judy Wood and I have gone over images from 9/11. And for those of you that don't have her book, Where Did the Towers Go?, you may not necessarily have seen this before. And for those of you that have seen her work and have joined us on any of the shows previously, you'll know that she has some amazing insights into some of these questions. And, it's interesting how people will kind of draw conclusions without having followed the evidence. And so I'm going to be showing a little bit of a video, a woman who has put together some information on on the fires. I find this all really helpful. So what I do is I look at it from a very an observer's point of view. I'm not trying to draw any conclusions, and I'm hearing what she has to say. And then what I do is I go out and do my own research. So that's what I've been doing all day. Starting this morning when I took a look at the, starting with the information that I was given, a link that I was given. So this is actually from a reprint from the Los Angeles Times. Sorry, I didn't put maybe the link's down at the bottom. I apologize. Let me just go down here. I usually, original article, latimes.com, right there. Okay, so I usually try to have the original article link, and I put it down at the bottom. Maybe I should put it at the top. But you'll find it somewhere in there. And I do give attribution to the writer. And so I like to draw from a variety of different sources, and this is by Thomas Kerwin. And if you click on the link, you can go to Thomas or Joseph Serna here and find out more about them. This is today's news, and it's out of Paradise, California. I want to give a shout out too to L.A. Marzulli, who's been on my show. I've done an interview with him, and he did lose his home. I don't know exactly where he lives, but I know he lives close by to Paradise, and certainly not looking like paradise right now. So this is from today's news. And again, we see the same phenomenon. We see some of the trees standing, although in this case, they're a lot more scorched, and it seems as though they've been much more affected. But you'll notice that in this picture, there's still a lot of there are a lot of trees that are really quite. They're not affected. They're quite unaffected, I was going to say, but I'm not sure if that's a good way to put it. You can see right here that there's a lot of these smaller bushes are scorched and burned. You can see over here, this place is interesting because it's got such a dark area here where something was really incinerated. So where some people see it as being a directed energy weapon, I have been making the case in the past couple of nights that this is probably more to do with the way that the places are wired and what is in the houses that makes them a target for this kind of, I call it a weapon if you want to, but it's more like an electromagnetic exchange that's taking place. You see how close these places are, and I noticed that a lot of these places that really burn to the ground are very close to one another. And yes, there are some where they're close to one another and one place will be burned and another place will be still standing. But these places on the cul-de-sac I find to be quite interesting, just because of the configuration, but also because it does seem to me that it creates this firestorm kind of concept. And so this is the aerial view of the destruction from the campfire in Paradise off of Clark Road, wherever that is. It has burned more than 7,000 structures. So it says it's burned. I'm not sure that means burned to the ground. But they do say that this is a very strange fire in the sense that it just seems to be it's burning hotter. The intense heat. The needles yellowed from the intense heat were not burned. Yeah. So again, this article that was sent to me by one of the viewers does point out. Most telling were the trees. Most of the pines that sheltered this community still had their canopies intact. The needles, yellowed from the intense heat, were not burned, evidence that the winds that morning had pushed the fire along so fast it never had a chance to rise into the trees. But as a surface fire, it lit up the homes that lay in its path. Okay, so something that we talked about was the idea that the fire is actually going to go to what is easiest to burn, the most combustible thing. These firestorms are quite incredible, and I'm just going to go back to one of the images that we've been looking at. This particular image here was really helpful because it actually shows how some things will get burned and some things will not be affected at all. But really telling here is when we have directed energy being used, you can see that there's certain distinguishing factors, like the fact that it's not really a burning so much as it's sort of an interaction with certain materials. And so this police car, this is from 9/11, and it's about a mile away from the World Trade Center. And these cars were actually towed away very quickly because I think that they were pretty inexplicable, like the engine mounts were missing. But you'll notice, too, that the electrical gadgetry is missing. Like that's why the doors are open and the trunk are open, because they're missing anything that seemingly that was magnetic. So these are just observations that Dr. Judy Wood made when she was going through all of the images. She started to notice that like the trunks were open on all the cars. and then you start looking closer and you see that all the locking mechanisms are gone. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to see the difference between what fire does and what a type of technology does. And, there's clearly some sort of technology that was used on 9/11 that affected vehicles that were a mile away. And what she would say about this is we know that there is that energy, there's that technology exists because we can see the effects of it. So we can say, well, it doesn't exist. You can say that all you want, but we can see that something anomalous is happening here. Whereas when we look at the car, so I'm just going to go back to taking a look at this other. Let me take this. Okay, so let me take a look at this. So when we take a look at a fire, for instance, you can see that these cars are sitting here. They're sitting right in front of the fire. So unlike the ones that were in, a mile away on 9/11, these cars are not actually affected. Now, of course, this isn't a close-up view, but we can see that some cars got burned and some cars did not get burned. And, that's like duh. But it's really, really important to recognize that there's there's something different going on here. There's something really strange going on here. You can see the actual scorching on the street of the fire. And so what we're trying to do here is just to take a look and establish whether this actually was a directed energy weapon in the traditional, in the sense of the 9/11 work that Dr. Judy Wood was doing in Where Did the Towers Go, which dustified the buildings and caused them to, 12 million tons to literally go up into the atmosphere. So again, what we're trying to do is just to discover if this is actually weird or if it's normal or if, what happens in other fires. And what I find interesting is people focus so much on these fires, but haven't really done much focusing on the fires that were in Australia 10 years ago. That the same things were happening in those fires as were happening here. So here's another, this is from last night as well, but just to show the difference between one neighborhood and another. And we looked at this last night too, but you can see some of these lawns are green. The trees have been singed, but the lawns are still intact, whereas the one that we were looking at before, the one that has no trees, here, big difference. So depending on the neighborhood. So again, what we have in houses is they're completely wired. They've got all this smart technology, quote unquote, throughout. And so, it just appears to me that for one thing, this neighborhood is a little bit younger. It's not surrounded by a forest. It looks like it's just been sort of mowed to the ground. And then, actually my nephew does this. He goes in with D9s. They just line up the D9s and they go into an area and they just plow it down. And then behind them, they've got people that are building the roads, and then they're building the foundations of the houses. And so they're all built basically the same way. And the wiring is exactly the same and all the rest of it. So these houses are built, and then the landscaping goes in at the very end. So the trees are not very mature at all. And when you look at the other image, when we're looking at the house, the one that has the trees, let me just take a look again at this one. Again, you can see that the trees are, this has actually been cut, a swath has been cut out of the forest. And so the trees that are standing in behind are, they've been there for quite a long time. I mean, based on the size. So these are the things that we want to take a look at when we're looking at the photographs. And just to, we don't just go, oh, look at all those houses. They've all disappeared. What are the differences between those two neighborhoods? The houses are all really close together, but the trees aren't burned in one situation, they are in another. And so what we were talking about last night too was the idea of, this idea of a fire-nado, it's called. That's the name given to it anyway. And so when we take a look at this, the way that a firestorm happens, this was actually in Australia, not in California, but it helps to illustrate what a firenado looks like, because sometimes they're in the midst of a fire, so we don't actually see them. But this is a really interesting one because it's a standalone, and it's exactly like a tornado. It has all the same attributes. So basically what happens is when you have the wind and the heat and something combustible, you have this phenomenon. It's found in nature that becomes its own weather pattern. Okay, so, and this again, it's from quite a few years ago. I mean, you could see this many years ago. It's always been a thing. Last night I showed people a rocket stove, and I won't go over that again. You can go and take a look at the video. But for any of you that have ever looked into a rocket stove, somebody said, "Oh, so this is basically just a fireplace with with air coming in." Right? Yeah. But what it does is it actually recombusts the fuel, so it burns the fuel really efficiently. It's sort of like there's wood burning stoves that do this, where you damp it down, and it will reburn the fuel that's in there, so that all you have left is ash. And so we're learning how to make these, how to replicate nature in a way. The difference between a rocket stove and a closed system is that the rocket stove has this air that's being fed into it all the time. In fact, if you have a mass heater, a rocket mass heater, you have a tube that comes in, kind of like a dryer vent that comes in, usually from the floor or from a wall or whatever, and it gets fed into the actual firebox, and it feeds air into that area. So, that is, we know how to make fire burn hotter, and we know how to make it create its own ecosystem, and that's really what a rocket stove does. And it actually creates this same kind of phenomenon. And again, the reason it's called a rocket stove is because it sounds like a rocket. And anybody that's been near a fire that is really blazing, whether it's a forest fire or a rocket stove, or sometimes even with really well-designed, I was going to say fireplaces, but fireplaces usually don't do this. But we've all heard that sound of a fire when it really gets starting to burn, and it has that whooshing sound. And so the more it blazes, the more whooshing we're going to hear, and that tells us that there's this combination of combustibles and air that is fueling this thing, and it's making it just go bananas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, just going to play a little bit of this video, because we've got this, it's from the Terra Times, and it was published on November 11th, so quite recently. And I thought this was interesting just to take a look at how people are, basically how they're assessing these fires. So I'm just going to just gonna get it going here, and make sure we've got our sound going. Okay, so there we go. Oh, I guess I have to show you. Not coming up on the screen. Why is that? Let's see. Sorry about that. Let's see. Oh, what's the deal? I can see it on my screen. Let me just. Okay, let's see if we can do it this way. Very strange. I'm actually using new technology, and that's my excuse. And you could probably hear the sound, but you cannot see the image. That's fun. Okay, well, anyway, it doesn't really, I'm not going to make a big deal about it. I had, best laid plans and all that sort of thing. I had it all laid out. But If you want to take a look at it, I can actually put it into the description. And we'll take a look at something else because we don't want to look at that one. So I'm being deliberate now. I'm just thinking that it should be making the transition. Oh well. Let's go over here to back to this image.
The average house fire burns at a temperature of about
so
11
I will
degrees
turn
Fahrenheit.
that off over there. So sorry about that, you guys. I will set it up. Anyway, so the name of the YouTube channel is TERRA Times, TIMES, and it's just a really good example of somebody who has decided that you're tripping. I like it. John says, "Oh yeah, I'm tripping." So well, I'm tripping too. I wish that I wasn't. I'm tripping over my own technology here. But okay, let's just see this. That what I'm really finding it bizarre that this is not right in the middle of the screen here on my screen. I can see this image that is not actually going live, which is kind of weird. Okay, so I'm going to go over to another screen here and see if we can get that. Boy, oh boy, I'm really having a bit of a battle. Okay, so that one works. Let's see if we can get this one to work. Nope. Okay, we're back to images. So there we go. There's oh, you know what? I'm wondering, it's probably something that I'm doing here. Sorry about that. Nope. Okay, well, you know what? This teaches me not to, I shouldn't be trying new things. I should be trying new things on a day when we're doing a show. But anyway, I am using a different switching system, and so I do apologize because it's going to be really tricky for me to find to be able to show this to you without being able to. So I'm just going to add another. I'm just going to see if I can add this. So basically, what we're doing here for anybody that's just joining us is that we are trying to actually go through things in the same way that Dr. Judy Wood has been going through, the situation on 9/11, through the images that are available, through the videos that are available, and to recognize the difference actually between what we're seeing with the California fires and what we're seeing, in terms of directed energy weapons. Because it is clearly not. Okay, so let me see. There we go. That's a little bit better. But I will bring up the page that I had here going. Okay, let's try this again. My apologies. I'm being determined. Okay. So anyway, here we go. This is you can. I've got the whole page there so that you can see. This is the name of the channel. What did I call it? It's called Terra Times. So we're going to just listen to this for a minute.
The average house fire burns at a temperature of about 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, which isn't hot enough to destroy most metals and earthly made substances. And if an item is well placed and small in size, its chances of survival increase drastically. Let's take a look at the burning point of a couple of materials. Glass burns at around 2600 to 2900 degrees Fahrenheit, which is more than double the regular temperature of house fires or forest fires. And let's see what we can find out about aluminum. Aluminum melts at around 1220 degrees. Some alloys burn a little bit hotter, around 1900 degrees. Now let's take a look at what the National Institute of Fire Safety and Safety Training say what will not generally burn in a house.
Okay, just so you know, I've actually put this on Red Pill Square. If you go over to Red Pill Square, you'll actually see this website.
After building fires. Many people keep personal documents in filing cabinets, which are often kept in home offices. And it says here that silver burns around 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's go down to barbecue grills, cookware, some appliances, stone table.
Okay, so I'm going to leave that just for now. I'm going to actually just make a couple of comments on this because she's basically making this contention that this couldn't possibly be a normal fire because of the the high burn point. The fact that there's steel that's burning and there are barbecues that are burning and that sort of thing. And so she's taking her information off of this website. As I said, that's on Red Pill Square. If you want to take a look at it, I've got a link to the site that she mentions on that particular video because it is helpful. It actually tells you the different burn points of the different, different metals and that sort of thing, aluminum. So let's just take a look over here. I'm going to go over to that site that she's mentioning, and let's just take a look. What will not burn in a fire? And so let's just take, so that this is called nifast.org, NIFAST, I believe it's called. And so this is the website that she's referring to. And it is really helpful because it says, do you know what will not burn in a house fire? Okay, so the thing that we need to understand here is that we're talking about a house fire, all right? And yes, these are houses, and they did burn to the ground, so we can call it a house fire. But a house fire is quite a different situation than a firestorm. So when we took a look at that image of the tornado that was created by fire, that is a particular phenomenon that takes place when you have certain types of conditions. You've got combustibles that are very, very dry. So fire is opportunistic. It's going to go wherever it can find combustibles the easiest. And if you've tried to start a fire in with wood that's a little bit wet, or even if it hasn't been dried out, why do we have our firewood dry out for months, sometimes on end, depending on where you live? Because there's actually a moisture content to all wood, even if it's been down for half a year. I was selling firewood, and I actually found this place that did kiln-dried firewood, which may seem ridiculous to some people. But what they were doing was they had extra room in the kiln when they were doing other things, and they decided that they would put some firewood in there as well, some wood, and they would get rid of the extra moisture content just to make it easier for people to start their fires. So I learned a lot about wood and the content. I was really surprised at how much water continues to be in wood, even if it's been down and chopped up and sitting in dry conditions over a summer, for instance. This guy said, so even when it was kiln dried, he said there was still a 19% moisture rate in this wood, which really surprised me. I thought it would be like zero. That's how dumb I was. But and I used to deliver firewood to people. That was one of the things that I was really interested in doing, because I was heating with wood myself. So I would I had these places where I'd get firewood, so I would just get some for other people. So then I went to the kiln dried version. So I've learned quite a bit about wood and how it burns, and the fact that there is a water content. And what I'm sensing is that people, like the woman that's narrating the other video, may not understand that trees that are still standing have an incredibly high moisture content. And so, if they're new trees, if they are in that one neighborhood where it was kind of a new landscaping or very little in the way of trees, the trees are going to be much more combustible than they are in a really well-established area. So just think of it that way. So here we go through, we've got the jewelry, silver coins, filing cabinets, tools, silverware, cookware, barbecue grill. And so, and of course there's marble and all sorts of different things. It is phenomenal. Stone table, fire safe, all these different things. It is phenomenal when we think about the idea that certain things that should not really be combustible actually melted in these fires. But that is not to be confused with the kind of weaponry or the kind of technology, shall we put it that way, that was used in 9/11 and that's being used in Iraq to dustify things. Okay, they didn't burn, they dustified. All right, so that's a really important distinction. So you can go through this information. I've put it on the site so that folks can take a look at it. I'm just going to go back to Red Pill Square and take a look at this article that we were looking at a bit earlier here. So again, we take a look at this. This is a really good image. It's from today's LA Times. And it really shows us some interesting things because right down here we have a truck. We can see a truck next to what was the house, I'm assuming. We can see that this house burned differently than this house here. I'm just really fascinated by how much charring has taken place over here in this corner, and almost like a squared off area, rectangulared off area in this room. And it makes me wonder what was in that room that made it burn so much hotter than the rest. And yet this truck is still there. So I don't see that many other vehicles. There's this truck over here. But you see that there's this structure here is still standing. Okay, and some of these trees are unaffected. So again, what I'm thinking is that the wiring in these houses, because of the smart technology, the smart meters interacting with the electromagnetic frequencies that are creating that soup, are creating a firestorm, firestorm conditions. So let's just take a look at what a firestorm is really quickly. If you take, this is right from Wikipedia, our favorite. Wikipedia never goes wrong. But with things like this, when we're talking about something like a firestorm, we can go in there and get some information. And so again, there's a lot of different places that we can go if we want to check it out more. But down here, we have some images. And so here, this is what I was really interested in, is this mechanism here, the thermal column. So you saw that picture of what looked like a tornado. That is called a firestorm, and the mechanism is, it's also called a thermal column. And here's the mechanism that's very, very similar to what you would see with the tornado, only it's a fire. So a firestorm is created as a result of the stack effect, as the heat of the original fire draws in more and more of the surrounding air. Okay, so we're talking about the rocket stove, right? So that's exactly the same concept. This draft can be quickly increased if a low-level jet stream exists over or near the fire. As the updraft mushrooms, strong inwardly directed gusty winds develop around the fire, supplying it with additional air. All right, so that's, again, if you want to go and take a look at yesterday's video and take a look at the rocket stove, you can see exactly that same phenomenon. Or go and check it out on another channel, a YouTube channel. There's lots of really good little sort of primers on rocket stoves and how they work. And I would say that they're probably the closest that we can create to this kind of thermal column. And so a firestorm may also develop into a mesocyclone and induce true tornadoes, fire whirls. Okay, and it says this occurred with the 2002 Durango fire. And I believe that was the Durango fire, I think that was in Australia. So basically, Australia has been dealing with this stuff for a long time. And now that it's come to California, people are taking notice. And I'm not suggesting that it's normal weather in California. I think what's happening is that the geoengineering that's happening, the chemtrails, the fact that they're creating a drought, is more the weaponry, the weapon of choice. And I would suggest that has a lot to do with why the conditions are now right. And the fact that they're not clearing out the underbrush. If you take a look back in history and you take a look at the trees in the redwood forests in Northern California, and you take a look at the age of those trees, some of them they're 400 years old, but you would think that they would be like 2,000 years old. It's very rare to find a 2,000-year-old tree because fires used to sweep up the coast. They went right up from California to Canada, to British Columbia, and they would just eat up huge swaths of forest. And the reason they know that is because you can take a look at the age of the trees. It's pretty easy to see that the trees have been destroyed and then they have grown back again. And in large part, that is because there, of course, wasn't any forest management. And so all of the stuff that was in the forest that had dropped off the trees, all the humus hummus is a whole different thing, but it tastes good. The humus that was coming, the needles and leaves falling off the trees would accumulate, and then in certain conditions would create, like if a lightning storm hit, it would actually light the materials on the forest floor on fire, and then that would create this huge forest fire. So we know that forest fires have been happening for a long time. We know that the conditions have been right some years, and so this whole idea that it's from global warming, think what you will. That's if you want to go that route, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to go the route that there's a lot of geoengineering going on, and you can see we took a look at that in last night's video. You could see the crisscross, and actually the night before, if you want to take a look and see the grid pattern that is being used. And then you can also take a listen to the interview with Dr. Ole Johansson, and you can see how that interacts with the smart technology, with the smart meters. And the smart meters have wiring throughout the house. Okay, some people may have more wires than others, but all of us are surrounded by electrical wiring. And when the electricity isn't turned off, in particular, and that was one thing they were finding with PG&E, they didn't actually turn off the electricity in these areas. And that's one of the protocols. I'm wondering why that happened. And they've actually been able to trace some of the fires back to the power stations. And they can see where there's been some destruction that's taken place right under the power lines. And I find that really interesting because on the street where I live, and I'm not in a fire zone, I was noticing that right under the power lines, and I just kept looking at it and thinking, is this just my imagination? There's actually, you can see where it's almost like it's got a little path right underneath the, and I don't know how to describe it except to say that there's just this line that you can see in the ground, on the ground, that is, it looks as though the electricity is disrupting the ground in some way to make this line like right underneath. And it's really hard to explain because it's not burned, but it's sort of it's just a different color. So the road, which is not paved, is just a darker color of dirt. It's not a very good way of describing it, but it's just weird. And it seems like there's just a tiny bit of a rut there too. So I think these electrical wires are actually causing an interaction with the environment as well. Okay, so this is another one that I found after I was put on to the story from the LA Times today. And this is from October 19th, 2016. And it's called Lessons Learned and Ignored from a Fire That Destroyed 3,450 Homes. Okay, so that was in Oakland Hills. This was a story from 2016, and they are then talking about 25 years ago. So would that be like 1991 or something like that? So conditions that contributed to the Oakland Hills fire 25 years ago reemerge. Okay, and so, yes, there it is, October 20th, 1991. The fire killed 25 people and destroyed nearly 3,500 homes. And so this is an interesting picture here because we've already taken a look at that police car, and we've taken a look at how directed energy weapons, how they interact with certain materials. And so not only was this article interesting because they're saying that this is not a new phenomenon, that this was happening many years ago. Maybe, because we didn't have such access to these images, and of course the internet. Al Gore hadn't invented it yet. So, I was actually using the internet in the late 80s, but certainly we weren't getting this kind of image. To get an image over the internet was pretty rare thing. So it's a lot to do with the fact that we have more access to these pictures, and so then we can study them a bit more. But if you take a look at this picture, you can see that things are consumed in the fire. Like you can see that the tires, for instance, were consumed. You can see where the seats were consumed. If you look at the images of the cars from 9/11, you'll notice that there's certain materials that have just disappeared completely. They're just gone. So it and very in a way that is it's very clean. Like if you look at the inside of some of the cars, the seats, the material on the seats has completely disappeared, and all that's left is the frame. Like not bits and pieces of the frame, not fabric hanging off of the frame, like some of it actually was destroyed by the fire and some of it wasn't. It wasn't destroyed by fire, it was destroyed by technology that consumed certain materials. Fire goes for whatever is combustible, and it's going to take a pretty hot fire to toast this car, but this is not toasted in a non-traditional way. You can see where the paint is peeling. You can see that that's what happens when fire is at a certain temperature. When it gets up to a certain temperature, paint peels. And that's what's happened here. You can see that the plastic has been destroyed. That the any plastic in this car, of course, it's from 1990, so there's probably not quite as much, but there's still quite a bit of plastic. Let's see. We want to go there. We don't want Dave Orama there. We're getting everything tonight. It's great. So then this I found really interesting too, because this is a really good comparison. It burned only 1,600 acres, just under 3 square miles, but killed 25 people, including an Oakland City police officer and an Oakland Fire Department battalion chief, while nearly a dozen residents died along Charing Cross Road in the hills above the Caldecott Tunnel, where they were caught in their cars by fast-moving fire. Okay, that's exactly the same thing that happened, and that, yes, the fire was bigger. This was only 1,600 acres, they say, only 1,600 acres as compared to the thousands of acres that are involved in the current fires. But we can see that the same phenomenon was taking place here. So by way of comparison, we have trees here that some of them are absolutely gone, and then we've got some trees that are not really affected. Of course, this is a lower saturation because it's an older picture, and so it's not quite as vibrant as the others. But we can see that some of these areas are completely flattened. And again, I'm going to attribute it somewhat to the electrical components that are in the house, because it seems as though areas that are made out of cement and the foundations, that sort of thing, a lot of those are still standing, and yet the wooden parts of the structures seem to have disappeared. But it's just really good to go back and take a look at what was happening before, and not to get sensationalized about it. And that is it's not to say that it isn't technology or weaponry that is being used here, but let's get smart and put on our thinking caps, and instead of getting all emotional about it, as is the case with the video that I was showing you. She actually has another guy, and they're going through and they're just going, this just isn't normal. This just isn't normal. Well, if you keep saying that enough, then of course people are going to start parroting it back. I'm trying to teach, just as Dr. Judy, well, I can't in any way compare myself to her, but my goal is the same as hers, is trying to get people to think critically and then to go and challenge other people to think critically. Because if we're just parroting things back and going, this isn't normal, what's normal? What do you know about fires? Have you taken a look at firestorms? Have you taken a look at the Australia fires? Have you gone back to 1991? And if you can see anomalies, then that's good. Let's specifically say what the anomalies are. What is different about the fires that we're seeing now and the fires that were happening then? Again, you can see that, again, it's the materials that we're looking at. We're looking at roofing material that is not as combustible with this particular house than with others. Since that time, they've actually changed the rules about shake roofs, for instance, too. And because the shakes were often the reason that the houses went up so fast. One of the things that is talked about in this other video, let's just go over there quickly, the genocidal fires. So she's all gone in the home. Okay, so to me, some of these houses look very similar to the ones that we're seeing in 1991. We're looking at the cars here. Oh, by the way, take a look at this rubber here on this vehicle. And this is a really, really good illustration of the difference between the material, the way the material is consumed on 9/11, and it's a really good way to understand that those vehicles that were toasted on 9/11 were not being affected by normal fires, quote unquote normal fires. This is what a normal fire, like a very, very hot fire, that one that is has been fueled by weather and that sort of thing. But this is what happens with rubber. You see how it melts? It doesn't disappear completely. Do we see doors open here? Do we see the hood open? Do we see an engine block that's missing? Okay, so part of what I'm doing here is to say that we can take a look at forensically at these images from the fires that just took place, but it also helps us when we're looking at what happened on 9/11 to understand that there was a type of technology at work just based on the evidence alone. We don't have to become sensationalized. We don't have to get, talk about, the Zionists and this and that. That's important. But first of all, we have to figure out what happened. We have to follow the evidence, and it's a very difficult thing for us in our modern era to just put on our thinking caps, to erase all the other stuff out of our minds. And it's, as I often will say, looking out the window and you see an accident and you see there's a body on, no, you don't see the accident. That's not true. You see a body on the street and you think that there's been an accident, or, you assume that they've been hit by a car until you actually go out of your apartment, go down the stairs and go out onto the street and take a look at that body, and you find out, oh, they have a bullet wound. Oh, they've been dead for a couple of hours. It takes following the evidence to be able to put together the information that's going to help us solve the crime. Okay. And if you can see that they may not have any injuries, because if there's no lividity, if they've been dead for 2 hours. So, it's going to take a little bit longer to figure out whether somebody dropped them out of a vehicle or whether they were run over or they've been there for 2 hours. These are all the things that we need to do before we start saying it was a white car and it was going, 50 miles an hour, and, they were, they were killed at this time or whatever. We need to actually follow the evidence wherever it takes us. And in our our rush to judgment about who's done it. And it's very similar to the Kavanaugh thing. It's like guilty by association, guilty until proven innocent. And if we're to look at this in a rational way, we can start to look at it forensically. We can start to say, well, look, in the case of this truck here, they're saying all vegetation unaffected, but fire hot enough to level the home, strip the vehicle. Yes, that happened again. It happened in 1993. Okay, so there were some things that were absolutely destroyed. And look, you got this little angel here, and the entire place is burned to the ground. It looks as though there's no charring. It's actually kind of eerie, that little angel. And so you can see in this image here where these guys have hoses in their hands. They're not being burned. The hoses aren't being burned because why? They have safety gear on. The fire isn't attracted to them. They're also spraying water. So they are going to be somewhat protected, mind you. People do die in those situations. These are very, very brave people. But some things are, like there's still glass in that door. So these are the things that we can take a look at from this article, which I found quite interesting. So one of the things that says California homeowners were required in a 2005 law to cut back flammable brush nearest their property. Okay, so that's one of the things that was recommended. But that 2 words, flammable brush. Some things are flammable, some things are not so flammable. So it's not weird at all, really, that you've got these big trees in the background that are well established, and that you would have this truck, for one thing, was probably full of gas. It's combustible. Trees, again, try to start a fire with one of those trees. Try and start a campfire with any one of those trees. And yes, it is burning very, very hot, but it's already attracted to the area over here where there are easy marks. There's easy combustibles. So again, this I wanted to go through a little bit more of this video. I had a couple of technical difficulties there for a bit, but they go through quite a few of these images, and it's quite interesting, and I highly recommend that you go over and go through all of this, and basically it's homework. Go through and take a look at it and take a listen to it and hear both of the speakers. She has another fellow who is talking about the anomalies as well, and start to evaluate it for yourself and see if you can understand why some things might have burned and some things might not have burned, so that you can help to explain it to people who are just getting caught up in the sensationalized aspect of this. And also, I mentioned that there's a really good documentary that is on my channel. It's the Australian wildfires, and you can see a lot. Oh, okay, that was one. Just a sec, going back there for just a sec. She talks about this place, if I can get it again. Okay, I think it's this place here. She's saying, look, the fire is coming from the inside. That looks like directed energy weapon. It looks like there's been a space beam that is hit that. I think she saw it says it looks like it's been hit by some sort of ray gun or something along those lines. And I don't want to misquote, but it looks as though it's been shot right into the house. Actually, no, that's not. That's where the combustibles are. I had a fire in my house when I was a young girl, and it started with a candle. Yes, it was my fault. And it started on my dresser. And it happened that I had this candle that was, I was like 11 years old or something, dummy, and I'd made it in an egg carton, and I didn't put any sort of bottom on it, so the wick went right down to the bottom of the egg carton, and there was no metal between the egg carton. Anyway, and I left it in there. Like, what a goof. And so I wasn't in the room, fortunately, I guess. Maybe I would have seen it had I been in there, but I probably would have died, because it burned right down. It started the dresser on fire, and right beside where I had the candle, or fairly close to it, there was some nail polish remover. And in those days, we had glass nail polish remover bottles, and so that thing just burst into flames, and there were little shards of glass on the other side of the room. And that was the accelerant that caused the room to go up in smoke. And then I had a Rubik's Cube and a couple of other things on the dresser, and they started to burn. And then they fused with the dresser. And so the dresser became this very combustible surface. And then other things didn't burn. So I've seen it myself. And actually, my dad grabbed a pillow. And because my brother was allergic to feathers, I had like a neoprene or whatever you call it pillow. And it started to burn really, really quickly. And it burned his hands. It acted just like napalm. And so I've seen myself that certain things will start on fire. So it's no surprise to me that this house starts on fire from the inside, because that's where all the combustibles are. So, it can get very, very hot and then spontaneously combust. But it also could be an electrical fire because the electrical lines are affected. Or, I'm going to throw this out. This is my particular take on it, and I'm not asking you to go down this road. I'm just asking you to entertain the idea. I think it could be that the smart meter caused a fire to accelerate, and it actually went inside the house because there are smart appliances that are communicating with the smart meter. So, I could be totally off base, but there's lots of reasons. Basically what she's doing is going through and going, this is impossible. So when we use the word impossible, then we start to really cut our thinking off. We start to cut off our critical thinking skills, because everything's possible. It's like Dr. Judy says, people say, well, it's impossible that the Twin Towers, and as it turns out, all the buildings could have been destroyed, in that amount of time. Well, no, it's not impossible. We saw that it happened. So now we have to look at the evidence, see that the buildings did actually dustify, and they came to the ground. They disappeared, I should say. There was nothing left of them to come to the ground. They dustified and disappeared before you could even have thrown a billiard ball off the roof. It took less time for them to disappear. So people will say, well, that's not possible, therefore it didn't happen. Well, we can take a look at it because we have the evidence. We have the videotaped evidence, and we can time it, and we can see how quickly that happened. And then we have to then start entertaining the idea that it did happen, therefore there is some sort of technology. Even if we don't know what it is and we don't understand it completely, we have to follow that evidence to its logical conclusion. Yes, there is technology that will do that. In this case, you can't say it's impossible. We can see that it's actually happening. But does that mean that the only possibility, if she's saying it's impossible, but then it is possible because there's space beams, but does it mean that the only possibility is that there's space beams? That there's some sort of ray gun that is being directed at this house in particular? And she's saying that, some houses were standing and some houses were not standing, therefore they were being targeted. So, you can see this house over here. I think there it is. That's the house that she's talking about, that she thought that there'd been, and the sense is that they're pouring accelerants on the fires. And so you can see that we can start to have, our own ideas and theories, or we can allow the evidence to speak. And so what I'm, again, trying to do through this series is to help people to put on their thinking caps. And so you can, I'm trying to provide as many resources as possible. So there you go. Wildfires are no longer wild. Now they target homes. So when we watch things like this, we create an emotional response to the narrative. And people will say, oh, yes, that must have been targeted. And that's absolutely fine. If the evidence takes us to the place where the only conclusion that we can draw is that that home right there was targeted for whatever reason, then, I'm absolutely fine with that, and we can follow that evidence. But I have been provided with no evidence in this video to substantiate that. It's just wildfires are no longer wild. Now they target homes. Okay? Wildfires are wild. Okay? And it's not a wildfire that we're talking about. We're talking about combustibles. We're talking about fire and how it responds with certain materials. And some of the information we're able to glean from Dr. Judy Wood is really helpful in this case, because she's helped us to understand how to look at fire, how to look at phenomena, and see things that we might not have otherwise seen, just by making comments like that, like wildfires are no longer wild, they're targeting homes. Well, we could say that this house is targeted as well. And this is a really good picture, actually, to help us see how these trees are affected and how they are burning, and how these trees over here seem to have been spared. And so, yes, it is going to be true that some, because they're so close to the actual source of the heat, or because they're in proximity to the home, or because they're made of certain materials, these ones are of a different kind, because these are deciduous and these are evergreen, for instance. Whatever it is, they're made of different things. So we don't just call it trees. We say this kind of tree, or this tree that was in close proximity to the home. This tree that was between two houses that were on fire, for instance. So, again, these are pictures from quite a long time ago as well. So I'm not going to go on and on. I think that you can understand what I'm trying to get at here. And you can see my point. And again, I'm going to let you see this image that I think is really, really telling. This fire tornado that is being attracted, just as in an electrical storm, electricity is attracted to like an aerial. If somebody has an aerial on their house, they're going to be more vulnerable to getting struck by lightning. That's why people have lightning rods, to direct the lightning away. So yeah, weather phenomenon does actually target particular items, particular substances. And again, if we take a look at the police car, and we see, let's just take a look at that again. Just after we've taken a look at that other vehicle, we can see that things are targeted. This vehicle there's certain areas that were targeted, and you can see very clearly that there's still a waxed spot there that has not been affected. You can see that there are plastic lights on the top that were not affected. In fact, you can see the lights on the back of the vehicle, but you can also see on the front tire it was actually consumed. There's just a rim left. And actually there's a bunch of other pictures that we saw. We took a look last night at some of the other pictures of the toasted cars. You can see one down the way there. They're missing the rubber. The rubber has not just melted into the car or into the sidewalk. In fact, you can't even see, there's no scorch marks or anything that you would normally see. The rust has set in already. So yeah, materials are targeted. They're targeted by fire. They're targeted by lightning. They're targeted by directed energy weapons. So there are various ways of targeting materials. But just to randomly say that a particular house was targeted and another house was spared, and not to understand the technology, in this case, nature's technology, that some things will be spared and some things will be burned, just like in my house fire, then we are really doing an injustice to the scientific method, the scientific method, as Stephen E. Jones would say. And so this is how people produce deception. This is how we get taken down various rabbit trails and various roads. And we need to keep our minds clear, and we need to keep our thought process very based in methodical principles, so that we're not getting sucked in and we're not being fed lies, and we're not having this fear-based information sort of shoved down our throats. And so here at this channel, what I'm trying to do is to take you through the process and to have you continue the discussion. Hopefully go over to redpillsquare.com, or even go over to Character Driven, or have a discussion here and challenge one another and throw out your best ideas. I'm very big on throwing out ideas and entertaining ideas and then working them through. That doesn't mean we belittle people. It means that we work them through to the point where we go, okay, the process of elimination, I call it. We can eliminate that as a possibility because it doesn't line up with the evidence. And so let's just keep following the evidence and carrying on with our pursuit of truth. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to have Dr. Wood on another time. When she's talked about the California fires. She's been maligned basically because she's asking people again to go back to what they know, and not to speculate, but rather to do the hard work. And so that's, again, what we're trying to do here, is to teach people how to know what they know, and not just to randomly pick from door number 1, door number 2, door number 3, which is what the powers that be want us to do. The crew want us to just buy into whatever they say. And that's why I'm also demonetized. People don't like hearing from Dr. Judy. They don't like hearing from people who are asking us to think critically. And so she's put her whole life on the line to be able to do this kind of work. And I just wanted to leave us with this image of her at the Breakthrough Energy Conference in 2012 tonight, and to recognize the amazing work that she's been doing over the years, and to really thank her for that. And again, I thank you so much for being part of the show tonight. And I will be back tomorrow night, and we're going to have some more interesting stuff. Hopefully I'll have all of my little technical difficulties. I have no idea what that was, but I will know for next time, and have a backup plan. But thank you so much for being here and for weighing in on this. I just really appreciate all of you, and thank you so much for being part of Character Driven and for supporting Dr. Wood's work. That's what I'm here to advocate and to promote as much as I can, because I think that everybody should be at least reading the book and going to the website and getting as educated as they can, so that they can help other people who have been dumbed down, help them to go back to the basics and start to learn how to learn, and to become critical thinkers.